I just want to welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today for another installment of our research webinar series hosted by our team here at the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute, or MVLRI. The goal of MVLRI is to expand Michigan's capacity to support new learning models, engage in active research to inform new policies in online and blended learning, and strengthen the state's infrastructures for sharing best practices. MVLRI is a division of MVU, or the Michigan Virtual University, which is a nonprofit organization whose mission is advancing K-12 education through digital learning, research, innovation, policy, and partnerships. MVU is also the parent company of Michigan Virtual School, a supplemental state-sponsored virtual school, Michigan LearnPort, an online professional development portal for K-12 educators and personnel, and MyBlend, a blended learning initiative providing K-12 schools with resources, products, and services to personalize learning options for their students and improve student achievement. A quick disclaimer before we get started: today's webinar will be recorded and shared publicly. Consequently, anything shared during this webinar, including chat comments, could be shared publicly. This webinar may represent a presenter's or an attendee's personal views, opinions, conclusions, and other information which do not necessarily reflect those of MVU and/or the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute, and are not given nor endorsed by MVU/MVLRI unless otherwise specified. We do endorse the comedy, though, so please keep that coming. Take a moment here just to introduce our presenters before I hand it over to them. Scott McLeod is widely recognized as one of the nation's leading experts on K-12 school technology leadership issues. After 14 years as an educational leadership professor, Dr. McLeod currently serves as the Director of Innovation for Prairie Lakes Area Education Agency in Iowa. He is also the founding director of the UCEA Center for the Advanced Study of Technology, Leadership, and Education, or CASEL, the nation's only academic center dedicated to the technology needs of school administrators, and was a co-creator of the wildly popular video series Did You Know, or Shift Happens. He has received numerous national awards for his technology leadership work, including recognitions from the cable industry, Phi Delta Kappa, the National School Boards Association, and the Center for Digital Education. In 2011, he was a visiting Canterbury Fellow at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand. In 2013, he received the Technology Leadership Award for the state of Iowa. Dr. McLeod blogs regularly about technology leadership issues at Dangerously Irrelevant and is a frequent keynote speaker and workshop facilitator at regional, state, national, and international conferences. He also is the co-editor of the book What School Leaders Need to Know About Digital Technologies and Social Media. We also have with us Jason W. Richardson, who is the director of the Center for the Advanced Study of Technology, Leadership, and Education, or CASEL, as previously mentioned, and an associate professor at the University of Kentucky. He researches leadership, technology, and international development, and Jason teaches in the only program in the U.S. and possibly the world dedicated to the leadership side of school technology integration. With that, I will hand it over to our presenters.
Thanks so much. Jason, I'm really glad to be here today. Let me give you a quick overview of what we're going to talk about. So we were given the challenge as part of this research handbook to explore the intersections of school administrators with online and blended learning. And the fun part about that is that there's not really a lot out there. So as Jason and I were joking about a couple of days ago, this could be like the world's shortest webinar, because we're like, so our topic is administrators and online blended learning, and there's basically nothing. Okay, any questions? But we decided to hack at our chapter a little bit, and so we will talk about sort of 4 areas. We'll talk about a little what we found that's been done by others, the work that we're doing ourselves, what we think needs to be done a little bit, and then we'll just open this up for discussion. Okay, so I think that's about it. So let me see if I can get my keyboard controls going here. Yes, no.
Who needs keyboards?
There we go. Got it. Okay, so we're going to start with what's being done. And it basically, we sort of have 4 main categories of existing research on this topic. By far, the biggest category is how do we prepare traditional brick and mortar school leaders within online environments? And so that intersection is the vast majority the kind of literature that we see out there, and there's various categories of research sort of within that, which we'll explain in just a moment. A second category is the preparation of virtual school leaders. So now getting to the beyond the traditional administrators them online, and now talking about the leaders of online schools themselves. There's a little bit of research on that. Third intersection is really around school leaders' perceptions of online learning generally, or blended credentialing, and I'll explain that when we get there. And then finally, we just have like a few random studies that are kind of floating around out there. So nothing super exciting. And let's just go through each one of those, just kind of giving an overview of what's there. So let's start with that category of online preparation of traditional school leaders. And really sort of the studies in this area have explored suitability and effectiveness, some descriptive characteristics of those programs, and then sort of the lived experience of the students that are in those programs. Or if you want to think about it another way, they fall into the categories of, should we even do online preparation of traditional school leaders? If so, how do we do it well? What do certain aspects of that look like, and how does it feel for participants? So let's start with the suitability. We have a variety of studies that kind of look at this idea of, should we even try to prepare school leaders online? These were mostly in the early days of online learning in higher ed, so folks like Brown and Corkle, who were instructors in the Wholly Online Educational Leadership Program, they were strong proponents of this. They were talked about how online instructors need to be cognizant of emotion and clarity, class instructions, how the chats work, student competencies, and they need to be very responsive and caring within these spaces. Now, in contrast to that, we have somebody like Killian in 2002, who basically, after sort of describing the basics of online learning, then had some pretty strong opinions about whether it was even appropriate for educational leaders. So, noting that the work of principals and superintendents in the field is in the moment and requires attention to messages delivered not just in words, but also in voice, tone, and gestures. She said that it's very difficult to imagine how online learning will build the essential face-to-face interpersonal communication that's the hallmark of an effective leader. Ever since sort of the early 2000s, we've had debates back and forth about whether online and blended learning spaces are appropriate and suitable for pre-service administrators, and what the advantages and disadvantages of that are. And that war has just been kind of waged ever since. The second wave has really, research studies that are more recent have really sort of recognized that online and blended learning in the preparation of traditional brick and mortar administrators is here to stay. And instead of debating whether we should do it or not, they instead focus on how do we do that and do that well. So Alvitz, et cetera, talked a lot about one university's hybrid doctoral program in terms of how they met and the internal mechanisms that they created, such as reflective journaling and end-of-course evaluations and so on, to make sure that it was of high quality. Similarly, in 2013, Norman did his dissertation on the content completion rate and student satisfaction for practicum in one of the educational leadership programs in Florida that shifted from face-to-face to online delivery. And we just have, a variety of other studies that sort of look at the structures and aspects of blended preparation courses to prepare these traditional brick and mortar administrators. One thing just to note, when these studies look at the effectiveness of these online programs, they're almost always relying on self-evaluations. And so student satisfaction surveys and of course evaluations tend to be the norm here, where basically educational leadership programs that are preparing traditional brick and mortar principals and superintendents are relying on the participants themselves to say whether or not the programs are any good and are doing well. There's probably some more sophisticated research models out there in terms of judging the effectiveness of online or blended preparation programs for traditional school administrators, but they're not being utilized right now. We got a few studies that just look at sort of what is certain aspects of these programs look like. How do we investigate particular areas? So hang on, now I got to find my slide. I'm lost. That one. Nope. All right, hang on. Okay, there we go. So for example, Shinsky and Stevens looked at whether or not social media and other online tools were effective when blended into pre-service administrator courses. Garland and Martin looked at interviews to compare different cohorts and notice the relationships between blended learning spaces and student learning styles. LaFrance and Calhoun have done some work in this area. There's just a lot of work on sort of different aspects of how to do these and do these well. And then finally, we've got a few studies that really ask the students themselves, what is it like to be a graduate student in these programs? So Ford and Vaughn looked at a cohort of 14 students who went through a 4-year online Edman doctoral program, and they talked about relationships and tech issues, professional learning and identity formation, collaboration issues, etc. How do those virtual identities interplay with academic learning outcomes? That was really the focus of that study. In another study, by Miller et al., these are people who actually talked about what their own experiences were like while earning an online doctorate in school administration, and talked about why they chose their programs, what their experiences were like, etc. So we have a little bit of research in that area. Second largest category of research around the intersection of school administration and online and blended learning is actual leaders of virtual schools rather than online preparation of brick and mortar schools. And so I think that distinction is pretty different. And most of the work that's being done fairly recently on this is from LaFrance and Beck. And the idea here is that we have all these virtual schools that are growing rapidly and they keep popping up like mushrooms everywhere, but we don't really know what good school leadership looks like in those areas. And we don't really know what effective preparation for leadership of those spaces looks like. And so LaFrance and Beck, for example, studied all of the school leadership prep programs that have been certified by NCATE to sort of determine the extent to which pre-service administrators were even exposed to virtual school settings at all. And they found that only 9% of university programs offered any kind of field experiences in online school settings. And that, over 75% of NCATE accredited leadership programs don't really have any plans to add virtual school field experiences for pre-service administrators. So here we have a rapid increase in virtual schools, and of course a concurrent rapid increase in virtual school leadership positions, but our traditional preparation programs are essentially ignoring them. Third category of research that's kind of floating around there is when you talk to principals or superintendents about whether they think online and blended schooling or credentialing is viable. So for example, would they hire teachers who were prepared online? What do they think about online and traditional online teacher training programs versus traditional teacher programs versus blended teaching programs? And so there's a few studies out there that talk about sort of what are administrators' perceptions of teachers that come through these blended or wholly online preparation spaces. And then we've just got weird random studies like what does the growth of online learning look like in their school district or in their state? What are the perceptions of administrators about the utility of online learning for students? There have been some attempts at writing model legislation. What does online professional learning for practicing administrators look like, et cetera? It's kind of a real grab bag of what's out there. So that's kind of the state of the literature. That's really what we cover in our chapter. Jason and I have been doing some work in this area as well. And so I'm going to hand it over to Jason, and he will sort of describe our own efforts in this area.
Is my audio coming through A-okay? Yeah? Okay, good. Making sure I'm not muted on my many devices here. So Scott and I have been researching the field of school technology leadership for about 14 years now, and we started getting our feet wet, if you will, in this idea of virtual schooling or online preparation, and just how that touches our entire field of school technology leadership. So one of the studies that we focused on is this idea of the perceptions of online credentials for school principals. So what do folks think about this? The studies that have been done looked at, would principals hire teachers? But we wanted to know, well, can these people even get jobs, people who want to move into the principalship? So we focused on that. We surveyed 500 human resource directors just randomly across the United States. We got back, I believe, something like 108 surveys. So these are the people that are the gatekeepers to these applications. So we wanted to know, what do you think about online preparation for principals? So this is a little bit small here, but you can start seeing some of the numbers here, especially in the agree. So we start asking people questions about, are these online programs lower quality? And you'll see that nearly a third say, yeah, online programs for preparation principles have to be lower quality, which is kind of interesting. So we also see that the third item there, are traditional face-to-face programs doing a better job than online, preparing candidates for the principalship than online? Heck yeah, 3/4 of the people say that. So interesting findings, just you can see here, we'll be glad to send this along, or if you want the article, we can gladly post that for folks. But you'll see also that traditional face-to-face programs definitely do a better job of hitting the local and state issues. We'll see that 83% believe that. So, the whole idea is, how can you prepare our local principals if you don't know our local context? So that was kind of interesting. So we started saying, hey, well, when we start looking at these credentials, when you start looking at principals who are trained online, which courses do you think are more difficult to actually teach online? So is it a matter of certain coursework that just can't be done online? So we started dividing up the data about on if a course was more difficult to teach online, if it was easier to teach online, or if it was just equally difficult, and if those kind of if it was at the course level that these human resource directors had a problem with hiring these folks. So you'll see here, more difficult to teach online, that first category. A lot of folks feel that about a lot of the courses that we're looking at. The most interesting one was the principal internship, right? That you can't teach that online. It was interesting data that we were getting from here. Most of these folks didn't really believe that principal candidates had a face-to-face internship. So there was this misunderstanding that, how did you do a virtual internship in schools? So people couldn't get their head around it. They couldn't quite fathom that there could be a system where we could host a program and people could do internships within their own local contexts. So that was interesting. But we look at special education or collective bargaining, instructional leadership, supervision. A lot of those items they tended to believe were much more difficult to teach in an online context. So in that study, we focused on a few different concerns here that these human resource directors had. They were concerned just writ large about the online preparation programs, how they can possibly do the job. They were really worried about quality of online coursework. And there was a big concern about how you could actually teach these courses online. What was kind of interesting, though, the perceptions of the quality weren't the same when you disaggregated the data by location, which was a little bit interesting when Scott and I were looking at this, saying, well, how can that be so? We sort of would think that those folks in the most rural area might have a worse perception of online teaching because people in urban areas might be more up to date with the technology. But actually the results were just the reverse. If they were in rural location, they were more likely to accept the quality, that you could have a quality program and that you could do an equal job. And so when we started looking into that, it's the idea that the people in rural schools were more likely to find those programs that serve their needs, because the urban schools could just go to, urban human resource directors could just go to the university down the road. So when we started looking at the qualitative data there, it's like, oh, it made sense. So it was a matter of more exposure to the courses, people's opinions and people's perceptions of quality changed. So we asked these human resource directors about what would it take to have a really good, high-quality online program for principal preparation. Some of the key characteristics that they believe they had to have human interactions. So they need to have interactions like this, where there's cameras like this, just like we're meeting in a spot, we're meeting face to face, just not physically together, we're meeting together via computer. Mentoring was really important. They were concerned that, how do you mentor in an online environment? How do you have local mentorship? So some of the feedback was, if you had some sort of a system where you had local mentors linked up with the university supervisors, that something like that might possibly work. And again, how do you ensure quality content and instruction? There was, again, a misunderstanding that these online programs were not accredited, when most of them are indeed accredited. So I'm watching the chats over here, and Scott's blaming me for something. So, and that there are essential skills that need to be developed, such as intercultural relationships, instructional leadership. So how do you infuse skills development into an online course? And of course, then how do you assure quality that these folks are actually doing a good job teaching the next generation of school leaders? Okay, so along that same vein, so a tangential study that Scott and I did, again with the same population, the survey was actually broken up into 2 different pieces. We looked at, first, again, the perceptions. How do human resource directors perceive online credentials of principals? But then, how do you actually treat these folks? So if someone's Vita comes across your desk who has an online degree or online courses, what would you do? So here we see that the data here show that would you allow people to get a lane change as far as like can they be boosted up in their salary? 43% say they could if they took online courses. Again, this is just discrete courses. But we also saw that there were a number of folks who would actually restrict that number. So you see that 42% somewhat agreed that they restrict the number of credits, and it might be, you know, like 6 credits or 9 credits that could actually be applied towards that lane change, could be from an online program. We see that it was almost 65%, so almost 2/3 of our respondents said that you need approval of online courses before you can actually apply those for a lane change, but that wasn't so for traditional courses, which was interesting. So there was the scarlet letter on online programs from the very beginning, which is not there in a traditional course, and we all know you can have just as bad as a traditional course as you could in a online course, but they still have a pre-approval process for online courses. They talked about do they believe that there should be standards to ensure that online courses are quality? We'll see that 40% believe that there should be standards, but those standards don't necessarily need to be in effect for face-to-face courses. We asked about were they even familiar with principal preparation programs, if they were in-state wholly online, in-state partially online, or out-of-state online. So you see that there was almost, in each one of those categories, most folks didn't really know if a program was online. So they had a difficult time telling if programs or courses were online or even partially online. A little bit better at the local level, right? So we saw in-state partially online. That about 45% said I could tell that. But for the other categories, they couldn't really tell. So they say that they would prejudge courses or programs, yet they also have a limitation in their knowledge of which programs are online. So that was interesting. See, this shouldn't have been centered. I'm sorry for my slide. It should have been left justified. So I apologize in advance. I'm sure Scott's going to be poking over there in the chat. So, the results of this study, we see that many districts really wouldn't even consider applicants with online degrees. So when asked would they look at an equally qualified person, they said they would take the face-to-face person any day over an online, even if the online person was superior. That you're viewed as being less qualified if you have an online degree, or online courses are viewed as being less prestigious. One of the interesting things, they said they would interview folks differently who had an online degree. So we're not really sure what that would look like, but they said they would have a different interview process for online certified principals. But they also see that they say they would do additional research if they knew the program was online, which is kind of interesting. So that tells us a little bit about the publicity that online programs need to put out there. We need to be a little bit clearer about what these programs look like, how they address these needs. So this study was one of the first of its kind to say, if you want to be a high quality program, what do you do? What does the consumer need to know? And how can you actually get that out there and demonstrate that you're meeting these needs that the field is wanting? And we do see that there are district or additional demands for on-the-job requirements. That was that study, which is kind of interesting. So we started wondering with this whole rise of virtual schooling or cyber schooling, depends on the literature that you're looking at. We wanted to know, what does virtual school leadership look like? So Scott and I partnered up with Jason LaFrance and Dennis Beck, which you saw in an earlier slide, where they did the first study, which appeared in the Educational Administration Quarterly, about principal internships. So if programs had principal internships in virtual schools. So we started saying, hey, let's actually look at these leaders. What do they look like? So we did a study on what are these challenges of virtual school leadership. So we looked at, I believe there were 13, that have to count again, virtual school leaders from all over the country. We used a data set from Advanced Ed, which is credits schools, and their database had something like 96 online schools. So we looked at every single one of them and invited everyone we possibly could to come interview with us, and we had only 13 folks who actually said that they would come. And again, we wanted the entire population, but only 13 would come to us, so we couldn't get any more. So some of the interesting things here, our article talks about some of the demographic details here. You'll see that a lot of these folks have very little experience as a school administrator, but maybe more experiences as a virtual school leader. So that's an interesting part, and that's another study. I'm not so sure I actually have that in my slide deck here, but I'll be presenting on that in another webinar about virtual school leaders, and I'm sure Justin or Kathy could put that out there to us. So when we look at what does it take to actually get a job as a virtual school leader, these were one of the research questions that we had. These folks gave their stories about how they had to demonstrate that they were flexible, they were adaptive, they had to be innovative. So they either had jobs in the tech industry or as program managers. They had to be tech savvy, so you had to have some degree of tech savviness, which is kind of interesting. Scott and I also did another study on tech savvy superintendents, and in that group, we realized that they didn't have to be tech savvy, they had to be good instructional leaders. And the tech savvy bit can be your tech chops could be learned, but the instructional leadership and the people skills can't be. But in virtual school leadership, you actually had to be a tech savvy leader before you could actually get that job, which is kind of interesting. But you also had to demonstrate that you had some competencies in being an instructional leader. So instructional leadership was much more important in this environment than in a traditional one. Not that it's not in a traditional brick and mortar school, but here to get their job, they had to somehow demonstrate that was one of the core components of them landing this job as a virtual school leader. They said that also they had to demonstrate that they were really good at communicating and collaborating, which in the interviews it came out how the communication bit was so important, because all your communication is written. So what you're putting out on the Twitter sphere, what you're putting out on your blog or on your online platforms. So they had to learn to communicate the mission and the vision really clearly, and communicating with stakeholders and collaborating with more and more folks. So that was interesting. When we asked virtual school leaders, hey, are there differences between your job and that of a brick and mortar school? They said, yeah, there's big differences in how you interact with students. So the school leader interacts a heck of a lot more with the students than you do in a brick and mortar school, which makes sense because you have access to all these students. You can just send them a note, and students might be able to just easily send you a note versus making an appointment in a classroom or an office if you want. Teacher supervision was much different. So keep in mind, in virtual schools, most, if not all of the learning is taking place within a learning management system. So the leaders talked about how it was actually much easier to supervise teachers because you didn't have to just go to their classroom, once a month or whatnot. They could just pop in at any time, 24/7, into a classroom and see what the teacher is doing. They can see what the interactions are of the teacher with the student. They can go in and look at any recorded lectures they have and get feedback at any point in time. So that was a really powerful part for these virtual school leaders. They talked about how providing PD was much different. Scott and I talk a lot about how PD needs to be differentiated by the learners, that it has to have sticking power, that you have to monitor it, that it has to be ongoing. These virtual school leaders seem to know that. They didn't just give one-shot PD to the entire faculty. They knew what each teacher needed, and they created PD just for them. So they could have just-in-time PD for one person, or they could bring these 3 people together and say, hey, let's have a session on instructional coaching, or let's have a session on how you can actually give robust feedback in our learning management system. So it was interesting how they talked about how that was a little bit easier to make that just-in-time and much more personal to the needs of the school. And managing day-to-day operations, they said, was much, much different because they didn't have things to do that the traditional school leader does, like, going to a basketball game or meeting with parents in your office after school or bus duty. They said those things were taking off their list, but your job is now 24/7 because you're responding to people who have questions and follow-ups whenever and wherever. So they were talking about how, they're on the phone and they always have to address all these needs. So they're always on, so they can't really go home. So that's some of the research that we've been doing. If you're interested in the virtual school stuff, Scott and I have one article published already. We can send you that link. And the other one is being reviewed right now, and it should be out here somewhat soon. So we will turn it over to Scott, who will talk about what do we think needs to be done in the field to move this forward.
Yes, just a couple quick conclusions here. I mean, the research literature around the intersection of online schooling or virtual schooling, blended learning, and administrators is really, really sparse. It's hard to conclude anything other than we don't really know much about what it means to be a leader of virtual schools. We've got some anecdotes, we've got some personal testimonials, we've got a few descriptive articles aimed at practitioners. There's not really a solid foundation of empirical research to inform our understandings of what the administrative complexities are that accompany being a leader of online learning environments. The research literature appears to indicate that, like for traditional schools, administrative supports are absolutely crucial to the success of virtual learning spaces, but that those supports take different forms when moved from brick and mortar settings to online settings. The administrators who are taking on virtual school leadership roles, either full or part-time, should probably be attempting to tap into the tacit knowledge of other leaders who are already in these roles, because until the research and the practice literature matures, current virtual school principals and directors are probably our best source of information around how to do the job effectively. Some suggestions for future work: really anything goes. Right now, the research landscape is essentially a big green field. Researchers who are unsure about where to start can examine the existing literature base for traditional educational leadership roles and then ask how those findings might be different if they were extrapolated to virtual school settings, and then investigate those. So essential leadership functions around curriculum and instruction, professional development, management and operations, budgeting and finance, supervision and evaluation of instructors, law and policy. There's lots and lots of areas here where we can take traditional educational leadership research and the findings there and then try to pull that into virtual or blended environments and say, how is it similar? How is it different? What can we investigate and try and find out so that we learn more about what does it mean to be a powerful and effective virtual blended school leader. It's just wide open right now. I think that is about all we have. There's just really not that much else to share. So let's open up things for questions and conversation and discussion. What's on your mind? What are you thinking right now? Somebody quickly scan the chat space and see maybe something to throw out there for us to chat about. Have you worked with the accrediting bodies on informing them on how to change? I have not done that work. I don't think Jason's been doing that work. He might be able to talk a little bit about his work with some ministries of education overseas and the kind of conversations he has with them about blended learning, if any. Mostly what I see from accrediting bodies so far has been that Illinois experience that I related earlier, where basically the traditional leadership programs band together and push through a requirement that X percentage of a student's experience in an admin program has to be face-to-face, because they were concerned about the incursion of what they saw were inferior online for-profit entities who were eroding their market share. And I think they were successful in that in Illinois in terms of accreditation requirements for admin prep programs. Other than that,
about accreditation, Advanced Ed does have separate accreditation criterion for online and blended schools, but I don't necessarily think the other ones are following suit. That's why we picked Advanced Ed as our population, because we knew that they had a concerted effort on knowing that these are a little bit different. So that would be interesting to see if other folks are addressing that need. Randy asked the question, Scott, about how do perceptions about online affect decisions regarding online leader selection and preparation? Our,
Yeah, and I didn't
our
understand that question.
I'm sorry.
I didn't understand that question, but I understood the next one.
I'll try to tackle it. How do they affect decisions regarding selection, Randy? Well, a lot of times what we saw is that people were candidates. It was hard for candidates with online degrees outside the state, particularly, to get a job in a school. So it was quite a challenge. So what does that mean for preparation? I think that for our institutions that prepare principals online, we need to do a better job of actually clarifying what it is that we do, and it's almost being on the defense. So you have to show that you're high quality versus traditional we assume is high quality even though it may not be.
So I just typed in the chat area that I think generally folks are still skeptical of online and blending preparation spaces versus face-to-face spaces. That's even while being deeply critical of those face-to-face spaces, but they're traditional, they're comfortable, they're what we know, and there's this perception that the online and blended spaces are somehow worse. I think that's eroding as more people participate in online learning of various kinds, whether formal or informal. But you know, it's very slow to trickle down. The ed leadership preparation programs around the country are doing very little in this area, as we noted. And I think, you know, if you talk to HR directors and the superintendents who are hiring, for example, out in districts, you know, pretty much most of the time they're going to still want a traditionally prepared person from a university that's near them that they know versus a more blended model from some university that they might not have heard of or that they're skeptical of that's further away.
And Randy, it goes also on the idea of exposure, right? The more exposed you are to quality online programs, the easier it is for you to be able to pick them out, right? So when we looked at some of the rural schools, they had a more positive feeling towards online preparation because they had more exposure. And they could actually tell you, and they noted that to us, that they did their homework, they could actually see which components they want. So some of the suggestions that we had, they would say, oh, do they have synchronous meetings? Oh, do they have internships that are actually face-to-face internships? Those kind of things. So it was trying to break down that misunderstanding of what they actually look like.
Right. So I think if you have a program that's incorporating some online aspects or some blended aspects, you have a couple decisions to make. One is, do you and your university indicate whether those experiences are online or blended on the transcript? Because if they're not, then the person can just say, oh, I got my degree from, you know, whatever university, and there's no indication that components of that were face-to-face. And that's honestly probably the smartest strategy right now. Mm-hmm. But another strategy, of course, would be to be very explicit about what kind of activities and experiences are online and blended versus which ones aren't, explain how the program's set up, and try to alleviate or allay the fears of those people out there who are hiring. And that's probably a secondary strategy that we also can use. But right now, I probably duck under the cover and stay under the radar.
And we see universities doing that. Even my very own University of Kentucky, I mean, our PhD is fully online, but we don't go around talking about that. I mean, our students know that, but to the general market, because this is the exact same courses that our face-to-face students take. They take them with our face-to-face students often.
Right. So, Jason, you want to respond to Catherine's comment that she just made, and then I'll respond to Grace's
Yeah, we have Grace's question up there, too. Kathy, to the ideas of internships, the online programs do require face-to-face internships. So I haven't come across any that don't. So, or they might be in a virtual school too. But that's, I mean, it's as face-to-face as you can get into a virtual school, right? But I think I've only seen one institution that actually prepares people for virtual school leadership. I came across it not too long ago. But all the other ones do require you to hook up with the school, have a supervisor in your local areas to do your shadowing. But you say, is it more a choose your own adventure path? I think to some extent, there are systems of checks and balances. So like how your online university then links up with your local institution to ensure that you have a high quality internship experience varies. So I've seen some institutions that have their courses online all across the state, and they have an entire system of internships all across the state that they have, so they know there's high quality internship supervisors going on. But I've seen other models where they don't actually have those supervisors, and you have to find your own supervisor. So it is all different kinds of systems. We don't have a model of what's working best yet.
So I want to respond to Randy's point here real quick before I slide back to Grace's question. So the conversation that I had with the accreditation people in Illinois was around exactly Randy's point, is that there's a continuum of online programs, right? Some are awesome, some are not so great, some are in between. Similarly, there's a continuum of face-to-face traditional administrator prep programs. Some are awesome, some are not great, some are in between, right? And that the question isn't whether it's face-to-face or online. The question is whether or not it's quality by whatever criteria you set. And those two bell curves are going to be, along some continuum, and they're going to overlap substantially. And so when you create policies, that accreditation standards that say things like X percentage of time has to be face-to-face or else, you're really sort of ignoring the fact that what you're really interested in is quality, not the medium by which the preparation occurs. But I don't think they really went that route. I think they kind of got it, but they weren't ready to go there or whatever. But we have to keep having these kinds of conversations. All right, I want to go back to Grace's comment about some admins in online schools don't have an education background at all, right? And I think that's one of the criticisms, I think, of some of these programs is that people in the field feel that they're being run like businesses, right? And that basically they're just trying to churn students and gain tuition revenue, and that they're worried about who's minding the ship when it comes to things like teaching quality and student retention and stuff like that. And so when we hire non-educators to run the systems, that helps contribute to skepticism in the field. And so if you're going to have a preparation program for teachers or administrators, where components of that are online, right, you better have some educators in there in visible and substantive roles in order to alleviate some of these concerns down the road about, well, what are people getting? Is it just a tuition revenues scam or factory, and they don't really care about preparing people? And if all the directors, for example, don't have education backgrounds and don't have administrator backgrounds, then there's some rightful questions about what are your qualifications to prepare these people and to supervise instruction.
But what we learned from fully online programs, from our virtual school project, is that there's also a misunderstanding that these folks who are running these schools don't have administrator licenses. They do. Everyone that we talked to had an administration license. Their background, though, was in business, or it was more at the district level. So it was a hodgepodge. So some of them were educators and some of them weren't. They came from the business field, but they did have administrative credentialing in their state. So, which is kind of interesting. So people think that they're all from business. Well, not necessarily they are, but they are still qualified just like anyone else, according to the state. And even when we look at face-to-face universities, we see into the principalship program, we see the requirements to get into a principalship program. Some of them require, like we require 3 years of experience, but not all universities do. So you could have gone straight from any other degree straight into principalship. So you could have a face-to-face principal who does not have any educational background also. I think those are probably rare. Most of them require some sort of educational experience. You had to sell what education might be. I mean, it might be a Boys and Girls Club, I suppose.
Right, and to Catherine's point about INACOL is working on virtual school leadership standards right now, well, that's great, but if we have preparation programs that ignore those, that doesn't really help any, right?
Right.
Okay, anything else you want to talk about? Give me a few seconds here to throw something into the chat box.
Chat's going crazy.
If you're a researcher, if you're a virtual school or blended learning researcher and you want to make a name for yourself, researching virtual school leaders and their preparation and practice is, like I said, it's a giant green field. You can basically carve out the niche as your own and become the world expert on it. Right now, there's nobody really in that space. You know, those of us who care about technology generally in school leadership have dabbled, people like me and Jason, like LaFrance and Beck, but nobody's really carved this out and be like, hey, I'm the reigning expert on here. So
Right.
you could make it yours. You could be world famous.
Yeah, and our article will come out here soon, like I mentioned, about, how do they land their job? What dispositions did they have? What kind of qualifications? What kind of past experiences they have? But the idea of preparation is, I guess we didn't do any work in how they were actually prepared. If that was in a face-to-face university or an online university, I guess we never really asked. We said, do you have a license?
It's wide open.
Yep, good point. Look at Scott creating people's futures.
Saving people's lives. All right.
One research study at a time.
That's right. So, Jason, what do we think is the most crucial piece we relate administrators who are preparing to get into the virtual leadership area?
What do we think the most crucial piece of advice is? Is that what you said? Oh, there it is.
Catherine's question is.
Our study actually talks about that. So it's almost like, so you want to get a job as a virtual school leader? Here's what you need to do. A lot of it's about, what good leadership is about in schools. So you have to be an instructional leader, and you have to be able to demonstrate that. So you have to say that you know how to run teams, you know how to mentor, you know how to communicate. So a lot of those soft skills that we say are important, you have to be able to demonstrate those somehow, because they're exponentially important in an online environment, right? I mean, you can't say something too cheeky if you're not face-to-face, because people would take it differently. So that's what you have to learn really, really quick, is that, you have to know how your messages will be delivered to the other person. So these people have to be really, really good communicators. They have to be really good at communicating their vision, right? Because a vision for online university or online school, changes all the time, depending on what the state does, or depending on rules, depending on charter school legislation, if it's a charter school. So it was very interesting, the role that vision plays. So we see that vision is important in face-to-face, but not nearly as important as it is in an online university, because some of these schools are trying to recruit folks, right? So it's like, why should I come to your school? So you have to have a vision of why your school is stellar, and what kind of students you want to attract, what kind of leaders you want to attract, what kind of teachers you want to attract.
Well, and like I just said in the comment area, Randy's dead on when he says, get a mentor, somebody who's already serving this role, so you can see what the day-to-day realities are. And then if you haven't taken an online course or two yourself, you probably shouldn't be leading an online program, because you don't know what it feels like.
And that's what they said too, right? And I would even say it also helps to take a bad one and a good one, right? So you know what doesn't work and what does work.
Sure. And you can pick almost any university in the country and get a bad one.
This is probably true. I would not argue with that.
All right, we're going to wrap up. Our contact info is here. I threw it up in the chat space earlier as well. Get in touch if you want copies of our studies at least. Catherine can help you get access to the research handbook in general and our chapter. And we can help you get access to particular studies that we've done ourselves. Other than that, I think we're going to hand this back over to the MVLRI folks. Yeah, I got that right. So that they can kind of wrap it up.
You're actually teaching teachers how to teach online before they're actually able to do it. Good stuff.
Thank you so much to our presenters. Thank you to our attendees for coming. I'm hoping everyone got a very valuable experience and was able to engage in some great discussion both here and on our Twitter chat at MVLRI Chat. Just a few things that we wanted to make mention of before we wrap up today. MVLRI will be hosting a pre-conference as an event prior to the INACOL Blended and Online Learning Symposium, which will be hosted on November 8th from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. So if you have an interest in helping plan what that meeting may look like, or if you have an interest in the meeting in general and you'd like to attend and like some more information about it, please reach out to us. We'll be posting our contact information here shortly. We also want to make mention of two of our ongoing initiatives. We have our podcast, which is known as Virtual Viewpoints, where we sit down and just try to get some perspective on folks who are working in the field of online and blended learning and how they're using research to inform their practice, as well as our guest blogger program. If you're interested in writing for us, if you'd like some of your own research to be shared out, not necessarily through the venue of a publication, but you'd like to engage in some discussion with other folks in the field, please check out our link there to learn more about our guest blogger program. We have an upcoming webinar, May 14th. We'll be hosting another author of a different chapter of the handbook. We'll be hosting Michael Barber from Sacred Heart University, and he'll be sharing some insight on the international landscape of K-12 online and blended learning. So get some ideas about how online and blended is being implemented abroad. And finally, if you'd like to reach out to us, provide us with feedback or insight on just about anything, shoot us an email at mvlri@mivu.org. If you'd like to sign up for our mailing list, you can click the link that's embedded there in the slide. That will take you to our MailChimp form to sign up for our mailing list. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Our handles are listed there, as well as our LinkedIn page, our YouTube channel, where we host the recordings of all of our archived webinars, and you can see all of our scheduled upcoming webinars on our own website, mvlri.org/presentations/webinars. Thank you again so much to our presenters. This was a great experience, a very interactive webinar, and I really appreciate your guys' style and unique insights. And even though you may think that the field is fledgling and that there isn't much to present on, I think we were able to get it to almost an hour pretty easily. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. Take care, everyone. Have a great week.